2024. I have the honor to serve as the Managing Director for the Ohio Center of Excellence for Behavioral Health Prevention and Promotion. And the center, we are just about to celebrate our year birthday of being fully staffed, but what we exist to support all of the prevention providers and prevention organizations and those working interested parties working in a prevention adjacent disciplines in supporting and uplifting prevention science and creating healthier communities in Ohio. So thank you for joining us. If this is your first prevention exchange forum, it's a pretty informal setup. We have two lovely guests joining us today, Amanda Lynch with the University of Cincinnati and Soli Hernandez, who is with the Ohio Council for Behavioral Health and Family Service Providers. Our partner, Tessa Miracle with the Pacific Institute for Research and Evaluation will moderate today's conversation. We usually kind of have a little warm up where we have a discussion with Amanda and Soli. And then we'll move into breakout rooms and give a chance for all of you on the call to interact with each other, interact with our panelists, interact with Tessa and I, and really the idea is to grow and learn together and learn from each other. So with that, I will turn it over to Tessa.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today. I know we've got an hour of your time reserved, so I really want to be respectful of that. Just a little bit of housekeeping, reminding folks, camera on, camera off, whatever you're most comfortable with and is supportive of you. But today, our goal is to talk about paths to prevention. So we recognize there are lots of paths to joining the prevention workforce, lots of folks that support the prevention workforce who maybe aren't directly credentialed themselves, but support employment of credentialed prevention folks, and recognizing that, working together and centering the prevention credential, we can work together for a common goal. So I'd like to invite our panelists to provide a brief introduction, focusing on their job and their experience, and tell us about your path to prevention.
I'll go first. Sorry, we didn't rehearse this, guys, so please bear with us. So I am Soli Hernandez. I am the Associate Director of Community Services for the Ohio Council of Behavioral Health and Family Services Providers, and that is a mouthful. We are a trade association, so we don't actually provide services to clients, but we provide services to behavioral health organizations across the state. So prior to working for the Ohio Council, I've been here for about 4 years now. But prior to that, I worked in community behavioral health. So I'm a licensed social worker. I've had many roles in community behavioral health. I was in the field working in a community behavioral health organization for about 13 years before coming over to the Ohio Council. And so started my career in actually being a case manager. So worked out in the community with people primarily with mental health, but also with substance use disorders, and went back and got my master's to become a social worker. And then, moved into more of a supervisory role and administrative functions as well. And so I actually supervised a number of the prevention programs that our organization did when I was at the previous organization. So mostly school-based prevention, but also some community-based prevention and health-related, like Help Me Grow programs and that kind of thing. So never have done direct prevention services, but have supervised prevention providers. And then also I have worked in the emergency room as a social worker doing crisis assessments for people who are experiencing suicidal ideation, homicidal ideation, or anything like that. So crisis assessments. And then really moved into a more administrative role, and in my last few years with the organization, and did operations and opened new facilities and managed a number of things. So I've done a lot in my career, a lot of direct service and a lot of supervision, and I think I have an indirect path to prevention, if you will, and that was one of the areas I really, in my history of supervising people, always like to have done the work that the people I was supervising were doing. And prevention is the one area where I never directly did that work, but it certainly was a great experience to supervise the prevention programs, because they get to do kind of it's a lot cooler stuff sometimes than the direct treatment, just because there's a little bit more flexibility, and the programming is very innovative. And honestly, prevention is where I think we need to focus more of our attention. That's a whole general issue I could go on about forever, so I will stop there and let Amanda introduce herself.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amanda Oni, formerly Amanda Lynch. And I'm seeing some names on here on the participant list because my history goes back a while, and my path to prevention actually started as a youth. I was a youth-led kid. I grew up in Marion County, and I was involved in the Teen Institute program there that's still going strong today. And I was actually one of those folks who, I would say, I'm rare in the sense that I graduated from high school and knew that I wanted to work in prevention. Like, I went into college saying this is what I wanted to do. And so I went to BGSU for undergrad. My bachelor's is in human development and family studies, and I got a minor in health promotion. And that was kind of an interesting thing too, because I really debated, did I want to go the social work route, or should I do something that's a little more indirect? I wasn't sure, but I felt like that was a good fit for me. And then after I graduated from undergrad, I actually moved out to Salem, Oregon, and I was a program coordinator at a DFC funded coalition. So I did all of their youth programs and actually started some youth-led prevention work out in the Pacific Northwest. So did that work out there. My position was grant funded. And so as my funding year was kind of coming to an end, my community partners at the health department said, hey, we need a part-time person to do tobacco prevention work. And so, and at that time, when I graduated from BG, I did get my CHES certification. So I became a certified health education specialist. So I had that credential. And after my first year working in the field, I then got my OCPS. And at that time, it was the OCPS 1. It has since changed, but yeah, so that was kind of what I did. The second half of my time out there, I was half-time at the health department doing tobacco prevention work, focused on environmental strategies, doing policy change and things like that. And then I was still part-time at the nonprofit organization doing youth-led prevention work. So, and then after a while of doing that, I said I missed school, and I found myself reading research studies for fun, and I was like, I should probably go back to school. So I came back to Ohio and got my master's at the University of Cincinnati. My master's is in community health promotion and education. And then while I was in grad school, I was a graduate assistant, and I was teaching courses. And then the academic program had essentially, they needed someone to stick around and teach. And so I taught for them for a year full time as a temporary faculty member. And then someone else retired. And so I stuck around for a second year. And then I started doing a bunch of other stuff outside of teaching. And they really liked what I was doing, so they made a position for me. And so my current title, I am an associate professor educator at the University of Cincinnati in the health promotion and education program. And our undergraduate degree is now a Bachelor of Science in Public Health with a focus on health promotion and education. And then we still offer some master's degrees, and we have a doctoral degree. Actually, Tessa is one of our graduates from our PhD program. So, but yeah, and then let's see. And then today in my work, so obviously I teach courses. One of my students is hanging out behind me right now because we have a bunch of things going on for National Public Health Week next week. And actually I have class at 2 p.m. and she's in my class as well. So we just have a lot of stuff happening right now. And yeah, and then I do a lot of service activities on campus. So I still very much have my prevention roots. I work closely with a university-wide collaborative called Healthy UC, where we focus on creating a culture of well-being, which has a lot of focus on behavioral health. I work really closely with our counseling center and our student wellness center. We did have the Rise and Thrive grant. So if any, I saw some familiar names. So I know there are some communities on here who had the Rise and Thrive grant for campus community partnerships. So I was one of the PIs on that, doing lots of prevention stuff. We work closely with Prevention First here in Cincinnati. So yeah, so I still have my hands in a lot of different buckets, but technically I'm in like an academic role. But I have the flexibility to do a lot of things outside of that as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Soli and Amanda. I appreciate, and I'm sure our friends appreciate learning a bit more about your path to prevention in your current role, and recognizing, in prevention, we have so many opportunities to contribute to the health and well-being of Ohioans, and it sometimes just looks a little different. Our day-to-day role, it's not always the person providing education to fifth graders. I think that's sort of the stereotype of what prevention specialists do, that we go in and we provide curriculum in a school, and it's so much bigger than that. There's so much more that we do, recognizing that work is really meaningful. That's not our only work that we engage in. So I appreciate both of you being very candid about your experience and your path to prevention. We know the field of prevention, just like any other field, has evolved over time. Can you tell us about your experience working with new partners, organizations, or topics, and what you've learned about working with professionals with maybe a different credential or even with different training and experience? So as we heard, both of you come from different backgrounds. I know my background was a little different. I came from research and came over. So recognizing, even though I'm a credentialed prevention professional, I do have a different background than other folks. So we would love to hear from both of you about your experience and what that looked like.
Yeah, so I think for me, obviously my background is primarily community behavioral health. And so that's been a lot of my experience working with folks in prevention, and many of the staff. I mean, this is something I think we'll talk about a little bit, but primarily when you look at the community behavioral health organizations that are providing prevention services, it's typically school-based services, or they're county funded through the local ADAM boards for community-based prevention. And often those organizations are looking to hire people who are not just prevention credentialed, but licensed as social workers typically, because of the way funding works, right? So that's a big piece of how that comes into play. And so most of the folks I've worked with that have prevention backgrounds do typically have, they might have the prevention credential also, but they usually have a social work license, has generally been kind of the background there. And so it is interesting because I think folks with both certainly might have a different approach to things. Sometimes that might be more treatment heavy, and that was something we always had to make sure that we were being aware and being cautious of, especially in the schools. I think it can be a slippery slope from prevention to then treatment. So that is, something that I've always been cautious of. And certainly the school-based prevention teams had a number of prevention interventions they were using, but then would have, screening to screen people through to treatment, and then have treatment options as well. So always kind of looking to be able to offer that full spectrum of prevention and intervention, because honestly, the schools prefer it too. But I know that can sometimes be difficult for folks that haven't done a lot of prevention work, or just getting into prevention, and they've had more of a treatment focused background.
Yeah, and I would say for me, a lot of my work again has kind of been community coalition oriented and community-based prevention, as well as prevention in the higher ed space. Whereas I know a lot of other, most community-based things tend to be a little bit more K through 12 based, or working with parents and things like that. So I think obviously with coalitions, what we know, and I know again, a lot of the folks on this call do coalition work. You have so many people who come to those tables who aren't working in prevention as their 40-hour-a-week job, but everyone kind of has a little piece of the puzzle and something to contribute. And so we often kind of talk about the challenges in speaking different language. And I know from my perspective, even again, as a youth-led prevention kid, I always was speaking prevention language, and even using that phrase, working in prevention, to me, historically, that was always substance abuse prevention. And we would say ATOD and all of those sorts of things. And now the term prevention has definitely taken on all sorts of meanings, and lots of people use it to describe lots of different things. And so, kind of even thinking about it from that lens, and as I was starting to, I was thinking like, oh, how am I going to phrase this? Most of my work has been in primary prevention, a term we would use in public health, universal prevention, if we're speaking, prevention language. And that was actually a challenge for me since I took my OCPS exam and my CHES exam just 1 year apart from each other. I had to be like, okay, which hat am I wearing? Am I speaking like health education, public health language, or am I speaking prevention language right now? Because a lot of times we're talking about the same stuff, but we're using different terms to describe these things. And we see that again, in coalition work, depending on where people are coming from, these might be phrases that they've never used before, but the concepts are all understandable, and we have something that we can relate to. And I think with that, not only with the different backgrounds, educational backgrounds, credentials, and things like that, also where people are employed, that can look really different too. So Soli mentioned funding sources and how that can kind of dictate where money is going, and obviously who's hiring what types of roles. But I know, like when I was working out in Oregon, my closest community partner that I worked with, so I was actually employed by a community action agency. They were the agency that housed the DFC coalition. And my closest community partner, who her title was prevention specialist, she actually worked for the city of Salem in their essentially it was like community and recreation department. And so you just never know where you're going to find prevention folks. I think that's kind of our reality. Sometimes they're at family and Children First Council. Sometimes they're employed by perhaps the Mental Health Recovery Board or Adam H. Board in the community, obviously nonprofit organizations. Sometimes they're within the school or perhaps the County Educational Service Center. I know like up in Wood County, a lot of the prevention folks they kind of come out of their educational service center up there. So it really is so different community by community. And I think anytime we go into a new space, we can never assume, oh, this is where you're going to find the prevention people, because a lot of times they're hiding in various places. Or again, maybe they're actually at a treatment agency and they're the one prevention person and they have their little office, in the corner, and they're kind of all by themselves, and they need people, they need other folks in the community. And maybe some of you are those folks. And so I want to recognize you and the challenges that can come from being kind of the sole prevention provider at your agency. And of course, we know that public health departments have really kind of taken a step in this landscape as well, especially when the tobacco money came down. We saw tobacco work started coming through public health. And then with the opiate epidemic, and as we all know, kind of the streams of funding, there's the OMOS stream of funding and there's the ODH stream of funding, and who's getting what money. And these things can kind of get convoluted because we all have shared interests, but a lot of times the systems want to put us in a specific bucket, and that's not realistic on a community level when we're doing this work on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, I think kind of my biggest takeaway is that you can find prevention people everywhere, and they might have lots of different backgrounds and things that have brought them to the field.
Thank you. Thank you both for sharing your perspective and your experience with the path to prevention. And Amanda, I think you touched really well on sort of the variance in the workforce, the background that we have. And I think that's a real benefit. It's not a deficit, and it gives us an opportunity to really look at things in a cross-sectional manner. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about your experience with the workforce in prevention, and then also about collaboration in this space, and meaningful collaboration while centering the prevention credential and recognizing we have this skill set, we have a credential, and as we look to collaborate, we have common goals, and some of us have sort of a niche spot we can fill to support that goal, but always wanting to make sure we're centering that prevention credential.
Yeah, I guess I can jump in. I didn't see Sully unmute herself right away, so I suppose I can jump in here. I mean, I think just in general, trying to have an understanding of those different backgrounds and what people are bringing to the table, instead of assuming, oh, they're not a social worker, so they can't be in this space, or they're not going to do it correctly, right? Which I would never assume that people are doing that, but I think there is, as professionals, we tend to have a sense of pride in our scope of practice and what we have been trained to do. And I know, like for us in public health education, we'll frequently see positions posted and the organization, the requirement, they're looking for an RN. And we're like, but you said that you want them to do community needs assessments and program planning and evaluation, and nurses are not trained to do that, right? And that's like very frustrating to us as professionals sometimes, because we know what we've been trained to do, but our profession is not as well known as a nurse or a social worker or what have you. And so I think that just kind of also recognizing that just because a person has specific letters next to their name doesn't mean that they are just those letters, and that they can probably bring a lot more to the table than maybe we assume that they bring. And again, especially if you're in a hiring role, trying to get an understanding of, and I know this kind of bleeds into the next topic, but this idea of what kind of degrees are people getting nowadays, and what are those other credentials that could have assets for the work that we're doing. And again, as we all know, it's great to have various perspectives, and not only diversity as far as demographics and all of those sorts of things, but also diversity in terms of our backgrounds as well, is our educational backgrounds and what people are bringing to the table.
Yeah, and I think just to add on to that, I think in terms of the frustration sometimes around the hiring requirements, right? So looking for an RN or an LSW specifically, when it's like, this seems like just a prevention position, and this is a prevention position, but why are they asking for these specific credentials? And I know just from my experience previously, it's because often those prevention programs aren't funded at a level to be a full-time position, but most organizations know that people want full-time work, right? And so they're trying to find ways to make full-time positions. So often people in community behavioral health organizations that are doing prevention work are also doing treatment, or they're also doing something else, and they're a 50-50 split kind of position, or they want to be prepared that if the funding doesn't get continued, and I know Amanda mentioned like her grant funding ended, right? And so when that ends, or if it's cut, organizations want to be able to not have to fire people, right? Like nobody wants to do that. And so they know they can find something for them to do within the organization. If they have an LSW, if they are an RN, they can kind of repurpose their position if a grant would end. So I think that I appreciate that frustration, and I think it's valid across the board, right? Again, I will say prevention needs to be funded differently, in my opinion. It needs to be funded better. The stability and the long-term feasibility of certain programs, it's a year-to-year kind of cycle, and that's not tenable for a lot of people or organizations. So I think that's where that requirement for maybe a higher, not higher, I'm trying not to put this in a hierarchy, but a varied credential comes out, right? Where it's like, no, you need to be a social worker, you need to be an RN, when maybe you don't. So I think that's just a piece of at least the organizational side of why those requirements come into play.
Yeah, and I understand sometimes our language to represent a focus feels hierarchical, and I think I just wanted to jump in because I understand what it feels like when you're all of a sudden on camera and it's like, wait, I was trying to say their main focus is prevention, not that it's just prevention, but the main focus of it would be primary prevention, which, I intentionally sought out in my career path because I think it allows us to hone our skills, and it also allows us to, I think in these conversations, especially as we're looking at this macro level work and hiring, allows us to elevate prevention science and recognize, as a prevention professional, I wouldn't be hired to do nursing work because I'm not skilled for that. And I can recognize as a PhD, sometimes I understand how sometimes people assume I have skills I don't have because my training was very specialized for the work that I wanted to do, and recognizing what that looks like for us. I know that we have built in some time for us to discuss separately, so I really want to thank you guys for sharing your insight. I know we bring different backgrounds, and I know there's some nuance to the credentials. So we want, in response to what we've learned, we'd like to invite you to participate in one of two breakout rooms. So today we're only going to have one breakout session. I'm going to open those rooms in a moment, and those sessions are not recorded. This is sort of for allowance of conversation around the topics that were presented today. In breakout room 1, we're going to invite you to join Amanda and learn about what students are being equipped with today. So understanding, in obtaining our prevention credential, we have folks from different educational backgrounds. So making sure, I know the skill set that my research associate brings is different than mine because we have a slightly different educational background. That doesn't mean without the proper training, we couldn't achieve a prevention credential, but we may have some extra tool in our toolbox that is helpful. And then in breakout room 2, we're going to have Soli discussing some of the systemic barriers that jump in the way of prevention specialists operating in all spaces and how we can kind of tackle some of those barriers. So how we can collaborate to ensure success in both of these spaces is sort of the overarching theme, recognizing we have a common goal, prevention specialists, we work within our scope, and then recognizing the scopes of others and how we can all work together in a mosaic for a common goal. So I'm going to open these breakout rooms. We are going to set a timer. We'll come back together in 10 minutes. And as a reminder, these are not recorded. As you join your groups, I would like to remind you that we are going to ask what you learned and maybe some ideas that were shared. So if you want to elect one person to represent you, if you want to elect your whole group, that's okay. But I'm going to go ahead and open these rooms now. And thank you so much for sharing your expertise, Amanda and Soli. I see folks. If you do not see the breakout room option jumping in front of you, at your bottom ribbon of Zoom, you should see something that looks sort of like 4 squares on top of each other, depending on the version of Zoom you have. So just in case you didn't receive that pop-up to join a breakout room, I do see folks filtering through. Wonderful. Thank you all for filtering back together. Thank you so much. I know we started having some discussions around scope of practice and training and work, so I find all of those really helpful. So I'd love to hear from you what you learned within your groups. You are welcome to unmute. You are welcome to type in the chat, whatever is helpful to you. And I'm going to go ahead, take a look and make sure all of our friends are back with us. It looks like everybody is back. So could I get a volunteer from room 1?
We did not talk about this as a group. I apologize. But is there anyone that was in our group that wants to chime in with some takeaways?
I can.
Awesome, thanks.
I mean, we had some questions. I was interested in learning more about how the educational, in the universities and stuff like that, how that's impacting the understanding of people that are already in the field, because that seems to be a struggle when someone's coming in with prevention credentials, and being trained by someone that doesn't know a whole lot about the differences between intervention and prevention. And Amanda was able to tell us some of the different kinds of prevention and outreach or health outreach kind of classes that they're teaching now that's going to help with that. But we also know that we need to spread the word about prevention more, so that even the older folks in the field that's been doing it for years can identify what the differences is between intervention and prevention.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Thank you for, and I'm sorry, I thought I saw Amanda nodding, so I was kind of pausing because I thought you were going to jump in. I'm so sorry. Was there something you wanted to add?
Well, and then I saw Molly unmute herself, so I thought that Molly was going to chime in and say something.
Actually, I muted myself. I was not muted.
Oh, okay.
That's
fair.
I'm not muted.
That's fair. Yeah, I would just kind of add on, the thing that we kind of ended with was the idea of celebrating and acknowledging the work that prevention folks are doing in our communities, because a lot of times it's behind the scenes, especially as we're doing environmental strategies. Our work is not, just like it's not easy to count prevention, it's not easy to always see prevention either. And as you all know, because you work very hard doing this, that there's someone behind it, right? There's somebody doing that work, and we never give ourselves credit. So whether it's a social marketing campaign or doing policy work, nobody's out there saying, oh, I was the professional who did that, and this is my background that I have. No, we're not giving ourselves any credit for this. So make sure that you're writing those press releases, make sure that you're giving yourself credit, and don't hide what you're doing, because it's really significant and it's making an impact.
Thank you, Amanda. I think I have noticed amongst prevention specialists tends to be a very strong and humble crowd. And I agree, we need to shout our successes more for visibility of the field, for that recognition. I know I myself, when I entered the field, was like, I want to do this thing. And I was describing prevention, and I was so excited when I found other people doing the same thing. And sometimes I look back and think, gosh, my life would have been so different if I had this path in front of me initially. Room 2 would love to hear more about what you guys discussed and what you learned today.
So we also did not elect a spokesperson, so we were too busy talking. So if anyone from group 2 would like to talk, that'd be great.
Well, if no one's going to talk, I will talk, because I can't be quiet. We talked about the systematic barriers around prevention, and one of the huge ones that she discussed was funding, which we all know is a huge systematic barrier. You don't get appointments for your behavioral health. You have your dental appointments and your well checks and all those kinds of things, and that would really be helpful. So we need to be advocating for insurance and Medicaid and all these folks that would pay for those preventative services, just like other insurances do for physical health. And, consistently and historically, it's been grant funding that has funded, prevention services, and that needs to be more consistent as well. We have, lots of community agencies that do both treatment and prevention. They get money from the boards. The reality is even the money the boards get is from our block grant. So it's still grant funded. So having a more consistent funding stream or mechanism would be very helpful. She also mentioned that, schools are really wanting to have LISWs in their systems. We talked a little bit about the fact that schools educating people about what prevention is, because really, if those schools had a preventionist or, we're working a lot with the Center of Excellence at Miami on behavioral health and wellness coordinators and getting them instituted into the schools. I think schools, someone today, we were on a call with an ESC, and they said, they want to counsel their way out of everything. They think the social workers need to do all of this counseling, when in reality, it could be some prevention services that would dissuade the need for some of those counseling services and allow them to really impact those tier 2 and tier 3 kiddos. So I think that's a huge systematic barrier as well that needs addressed. And I apologize because I jumped off, and I know Jose was saying something when I jumped off. So I'm going to tag you, Jose, and let you talk about what you said. I'm sorry, I missed it.
Well, thank you, Molly. I appreciate that. I was bringing up, we are all jockeying for time when it comes to prevention, and not just with school-based individuals either. We're talking about all kinds of community groups. They only have folks in for a little bit, either parent group or youth groups, and they only have a certain amount of time that they have with them, and then we're kind of seeing how we can barter for some of that time with them. We're addressing their needs, but also trying to slide in some prevention, good prevention information for them as well. And that 18 to 25-year-old group is always so busy, and as students get older, youth get older, they become busier and busier, and so time is just a real big barrier sometimes to access folks to provide prevention.
Absolutely. And I feel like, time is not always on our side as we're looking and, investing our time in prevention. And sometimes we do have to negotiate. And I saw a wonderful quote that was like, if you don't make time for your wellness, don't worry, illness will schedule it for you. So recognizing we can't counsel our way out of every problem. And there are several things that, gosh, we could, invest some time now and not have to deal with later on. As we're looking at our final 10 minutes together, is there anything room 1 or 2 wanted to add from our lessons together that you didn't get to share?
I think the other thing that came up in our group that I thought was a really good point. I mean, we had a conversation around how a lot of the schools don't understand prevention and what it is, and that idea of like you can't counsel out of everything, but also that prevention could be very helpful to, that often the schools are jumping to, no, they need treatment. And it's like, actually, they need some prevention services and some, indicated select services. But the other piece is that the students don't really know what prevention is, and that they don't know what that is as a service, but also as a career path. And so I thought that was a really good point of doing some more education and really almost recruitment of, new professionals.
And I'll just chime in on that. I know there's a young prevention professionals group out of the Ohio Prevention Professionals. And right before COVID hit, I know they were about to do like a tour at different universities and having prevention fairs. And then everything shut down and it has not since started back up. But I will tell you, as an instructor at a university, we love guest speakers. We love when someone comes in and talks for our class period so we don't have to. And our students love hearing other people like they want to hear from professionals. So if if you are near a local higher ed institution, look to some of those different academic programs, see where you can get in and talk at, within different classes and things like that. Guaranteed there's going to be some type of professional development course for the major, or a course that talks about their different career options. So that's definitely something that, get in there. If faculty members are not reaching out to you, you reach out to them and say, hey, let me come take over your class for a day. That would be very good. And I think, to some of the points that were just made a little earlier, we even see that the counsel your way out of it kind of mentality. We see that in higher ed as well. I know when I first started, our previous counseling center director would say, oh yeah, we do prevention because we have groups. And I was like, okay, well, a group, like having group therapy, is not the same as universal or primary prevention at all. And if someone's coming to that, that's because they're probably already struggling with something. So when we talk about changing policies and systems and culture, like that is definitely on the other kind of side of the spectrum. And so, but it was really interesting when some of us started to do some of this work. And at the time, we have a different director now, but the counseling center director was very, he was creating barriers for us to do this work, because he said, no, you don't need to be doing that. We're already doing prevention. And we were like, no, you're not. Like, that's not actually happening. And so, definitely forming partnerships with folks so there's not turf wars essentially on who is doing prevention and who's not doing prevention, and people who, yeah, we can get into all of that, but I think forming the partnerships and kind of saying, not necessarily like you stay in your lane and we'll stay in our lane, but here are the things that we're bringing to the table. What are you bringing to the table? And again, I think a university is it's kind of just like this, it's an entire community in like 1 or 2 square blocks. And so it's this little microcosm, but yeah, I think that is trying to approach it as early as you can from a partnership lens, so it doesn't become like you shouldn't do that, we're doing that kind of thing. And again, the scope of practice, like I remember there was a motivational interviewing training that was held on campus, and the counselors got very mad because they said this is a counseling strategy and no one else should be doing this. And we're like, actually, motivational interviewing is something that lots of different professionals use. But yeah, that was, so again, it's those turf wars, and trying to prevent those types of conversations by forming relationships with folks initially is certainly the best way we can go about that. But if you are experiencing that, I want to validate your concerns, because it is not something new, and it's something that a lot of us have experienced. So.
Absolutely. And thank you. I just want to thank you for sharing that perspective. And I do want to call out, I know we only have a couple moments left, but don't forget our community colleges as we're looking for institutions to work with, because I have been fortunate to present at a few career days, and you get to work with young folks that I think sometimes when we think of our institutions of higher education, we focus on the four-year universities. So recognizing we may get some folks even earlier in their career, a little younger. So I want to thank everyone for your time and attention today. We have had some great discussion. I think we could all go on for quite a long time about our path to prevention, maybe barriers we've experienced. But I do want to just really appreciate that both of you brought the lens of how can we use our credentials and work within our scope of work for a common aligned goal, and recognizing we all have a niche experience. Of course, in today's talk, our goal is to center the prevention specialist credential we have here in Ohio, and recognize that, we may have, Amanda brought up a good example of, we may have a field that has a similar name, but it doesn't always do the same work as us. So just recognizing that we all bring these layers of the work with us. Jen did drop the evaluation in the chat a little bit earlier, but I'm going to drop it one more time for you. Our scheduled time together is officially over in a few minutes, so I'm going to hand it back to Jen for, the closing remarks and things like that. We will stop the recording at 2 o'clock, but of course you're welcome to stay on and talk and share any thoughts or concerns you have then. Jen?
Thank you, Tessa. Thank you, Tessa. Thank you, Amanda and Soli, and all of you for contributing. The piece and so much that sticks out to me looking at, the folks on the call, thinking about the folks in your networks as I've been getting to meet, learn more about the work you're all doing. There's a place for everybody in prevention, and really, I just feel a lot of pride and joy. Like we are all united under that umbrella of the prevention science, right? And what an opportunity we have to, help educate others and understand truly what that means and what the capacity is and where their role is, whether we're coming at, our work formally or informally. We all have a different lens and a background. And so thank you for doing all that you are doing to amplify the work of prevention, and then certainly, everything you do behind the scenes that so many other folks don't see. We're all in the same boat. We understand, and we appreciate you. So I did drop the link one more time. I did not mean to drop it in about 15 minutes ago at that point, but you've got it twice now. So we'd appreciate hearing your feedback. If you have ideas or thoughts on other topics you'd like to discuss, please send an email or reach out. We're always happy to accommodate. But thank you for joining us, and have a wonderful evening. Afternoon, I guess. We're still a little early here. Take care, everyone.